Hi folks, Ryan Honeyman here from Lift Economy. Many folks have come to us over the last 10 years and asked, how do I get more involved in creating an economy that works for the benefit of all life? They also ask, what skills and experiences do I need to help make this transition? So 3 years ago, we created something called the Next Economy MBA to help address this and similar questions. Lift Economy's Next Economy MBA is an online course that's designed for entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, students, recent graduates, employees, and folks who want to learn more about transformational Next Economy strategies and businesses. Join the growing alumni network of nearly 250 alumni who've gone through this program and learned essential skills and hopefully built lifelong relationships for catalyzing businesses in the emergent and regenerative economy. So we encourage you to check out our course. You can go to lifteconomy.com/MBA. The next course, Cohort 7, starts on September 21st, 2021. So once again, go to www.lifteconomy.com/MBA. And now, on with the show. Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy. Regan, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on. So my first question, Regan, is where do you consider home and why?
Great question. I live geographically in San Francisco, and I grew up in Chicago. I really identify as a citizen of the world. That sounds kind of cliche, but I think increasingly we are going to be well served by seeing our interconnectedness with one another, both in terms of our social relationships and, of course, in terms of climate and ecology.
Awesome. As I mentioned to you previously, I did an interview with one of your relatives, Liesl Pritzker Simmons, and I realized some of the listeners may have heard of the Pritzker family and some haven't, but would you mind for some of the listeners who have maybe heard about Pritzker, but they don't really know, maybe a little bit of the family backstory so folks have some context?
Great. Well, there's the kind of multi-century version, and then there's kind of in the last 20 years, which I think is maybe the more relevant. My family made its way to the U.S. from outside of the Ukraine in Russia. That's the 200-year version during the pogroms in the late 1800s, and built a substantial family business through the sort of 70s, 80s, and 90s. Most people are familiar with Hyatt Hotels. That was one of the big companies that my cousin Jay founded and grew. And his brother, Bob Pritzker, was involved in manufacturing companies. He built a business called Marmon. And about 15 years ago, the family went through a big generational shift that resulted in my dad and each of his 11 cousins becoming more independently responsible for making decisions about philanthropy and investing. And that was a brand new experience for my dad, and kind of opened up a different range of possibilities and responsibilities for me and my siblings. And one of the first impacts for me was the founding of the Libra Foundation, which my mom and dad started at the beginning of that family transition 14 years ago. And there are a lot of us out there. We're all doing different projects. I'm really proud of my dad and his 10 cousins and all the different projects they're working on. And then in my generation, my older brother and I are kind of the oldest of probably maybe 50 of us, or some number like that. And some of those folks are still in school, and some are, out in the world, and a lot of interesting different projects. So we're easily confusable because we're all doing different things, but a lot of interesting projects to follow. So definitely a lot to watch there.
Yeah, and I know there's several Pritzker family members in impact investing as well, like especially Liesl and yourself, and I know there's like New Island Capital. There's so many cool funds popping up. So it's really interesting that your family's sort of moving towards impact.
Yeah, I think there's a family value around privacy and discretion. And so you don't always see us seeking public platforms. And I really appreciate that about the family. I think it comes from a connection. My particular branch of the family is not particularly observant of Judaism, but I think it does link back to the Jewish value of the highest form of service is anonymous on both ends. You know, so you're contributing to the public welfare without needing to take individual credit. And though a couple of us have stepped out more explicitly or more openly because we feel like there's an important element of sharing the story and advocating for the work we're doing. I still appreciate and respect that value system that says it's really not about me as the giver to get credit or acknowledgement, but that to the extent we talk about the work, it's really about the work and the folks that we are in service to in terms of the greater community that motivates that.
You know, it's very inspiring, honestly, to hear that, because a quick side story is I practice meditation through like sort of Buddhist practice, and I always remember one of the teachers was like, there's this way to build ego if you have sort of wealth is like donate money to like a hospital and call it like your name hospital or something, as if like it's like really all about like you and sort of I'm giving, but I want people to know for sure that how generous I am. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I've always been really uncomfortable with that. And actually in Chicago, you know, though I believe that my family has a value around that, you will in Chicago find the last name plastered on the side of buildings and parks and things like that. And it was actually one of the things that made me excited about leaving Chicago was to not have to be immediately identified as one of the Pritzkers. And yet, you know, it puts you in a funny position because I'm, you know, proud of the family history. And although, you know, I have criticism now about, you know, what it means to accumulate capital and the responsibility that I feel now to try to engage in practices that work towards correcting those kinds of imbalances in our systems. You know, there's this correlated kind of responsibility to claim the platform, right? So on the one hand, I appreciated a chance to not be identified as a Pritzker, not to be identified by my family's wealth. I moved to California. I got to experience a few years of a break from that. And then when circumstances changed and we as an immediate family, my dad and my siblings and myself, when we had more immediate responsibility to those resources, as I grew up, frankly, and felt more mature and more confident, I felt more of a responsibility to step out and be more transparent and step into the role of responsibility to see, okay, this isn't a great situation in some ways, but what can I do with this platform to try and make change and reconcile some of that discomfort, and by acknowledging it and working to confront it rather than kind of sticking my head in the sandbox and pretending it doesn't exist.
Yeah. I want to appreciate you for even coming on this podcast because I know it's sometimes hard to talk openly about, you know, these things. So much
Thanks.
Respect.
Thanks.
What about like that's sort of the family background. What about you? You know, what were you up to before sort of getting involved with Libra Foundation?
So one of the things I appreciated about my parents, who both were products of the 60s, very progressive and rooted in values of family and community and service. One of the things I grew up with when they dealt with this family wealth was a commitment to teaching my brother and me and my younger brothers when they came along that the benefit of the resources was that you could have choice. So it wasn't about you're going to be stuck following in the family business footsteps or any kind of obligation. It was really about opportunity. And they really encouraged us to find what we loved in the world and pursue those opportunities. And what I always felt passionate about was kids and education. All my summer jobs all through high school and college were always babysitting and summer camp and things like that, tutoring. And so I became an elementary school teacher. I did that. I actually still work intermittently as an elementary school teacher. That's kind of my happy place, working with kids. And a lot of that is being able to connect with innocence and wisdom of young people. I think they represent to me what's good in the world and what's possible, because they are constantly open to new things. They are ready to learn. They're curious. They're explorers. And so that is still a source of a lot of inspiration for me. But I also raised 3 kids during my sort of 20s and 30s. And so I worked part-time and was a mom part-time. And that was kind of my full-time gig until about, even 14 years ago when the foundation started. I joined the board, and my parents were great about being very inclusive about having our interests and our voices represented in the mission statement and in the work of the foundation. But I wasn't really spending a ton of time on it. And it really wasn't until about 4 years ago, as my kids got a little older. Again, I'd mentioned circumstances had changed where the family had an increasing amount of sort of personal accountability to investment decision making. And the foundation was actually growing in scale and size. And about 4 years ago, through conversations with some of my early mentors on the sort of impact investing side, including Kristen Hull, I participated in this great project called Play Big that Carol Newell
with Marion
started
Moore.
With Marion Moore.
Oh, great.
Joel Solomon. Credit also to RSF, Social Finance. So some of those folks were my kind of early community around the impact investing side. And that was about 4 years ago. I decided that if this family was going to be doing investing, and if we were going to really take this foundation project seriously, I really felt a motivation to better understand what the options were for better aligning our investing with our mission. We'd spent all this time developing a really personal and meaningful mission around human rights and transformative social justice work on the foundation grant making side. And I just felt uncomfortable that there still felt like there was a big disconnect between what we were doing with our grant making and what we were doing with our investing, both for the foundation endowment and for broader family investing projects. But I kind of decided that I had 2 different goals in starting with really looking closely at the endowment of the foundation. One was that it was a shared family platform, since everybody in my immediate family was on the board of that foundation, that if I tried to look at impact investing and aligned investing through that endowment fund, it would involve and include my family members, and we could go on a shared learning journey together. And the other was just a sense of moral obligation to align the investments of that foundation with its mission, that this is money that had already been, in a certain sense, entrusted to the public welfare. And if we were funding Pesticide Action Network in our grant making, and we had investments in Monsanto and Syngenta in our investment endowment, that really didn't make any sense. So that's kind of how I decided to make a bigger shift from teaching and parenting and really engage in building a team around us that could do more on the investing side to try to bring us up to a different standard. And I think what's been most interesting for me in that project is I think when I first jumped into that, I thought it was going to be a question of kind of checking boxes on an investment intake form. I was like, oh, let's do the impact investing. And I really was naive about the fact that this really is a field that is it's in a creation moment, and that you're building as you go. And so what's challenging is that it has taken a much bigger time commitment and engagement than I anticipated. But the payback is that as we're going and as we're experimenting, new opportunities are coming up, and we're able to kind of raise our bar, raise our standards of what we mean when we say impact investing. And that's been something that's pretty exciting to see. And, even to the point of challenging the very assumptions of investment, traditional investing constructs, like why, getting to a point where we can challenge, is there a right to, earning money on your invested capital? Like, can we challenge the basic assumption that the money kind of flows to the investor first, and challenging the structures of our financial systems that have created the problems that we're trying to solve in terms of, looking at the root causes of accumulated capital and wealth disparity as really, and the drivers of capitalism as we have currently envisioned it as the problem itself.
Yeah. And that really, that sort of notion of like, what is the return on investment, if any? Is it like market rate impact investing? Is it sort of quote unquote concessionary? Is it 0% just because it's like, does our corpus really need more return on investment? That puts you, I think, at a very leading edge of people who are thinking about these things, because you're right. It's like, how do you address the challenge that you're trying to in the world while also generating large returns, say, on investments? It's like, it's sort of counterintuitive.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, what's interesting is I do work within a context that still has a wealth building mission, in the sense that, we have a family office that does investing that's market rate, that's, interested in solutions oriented companies like Tesla or Proterra, the electric bus company, or some other good example, Revolution Foods, which is, healthy food getting into our kids' schools. But those are companies that are built with traditional return first economic modeling. And so there's folks who I work with and folks in my family who are more oriented towards that type of investment work. And then, we're each kind of trying to find our place within that ecosystem to push on the levers that we think are most effective towards change. So for me, it means sitting at this intersection between grant making and investing. So I'm comfortable starting to think, in a deeper way about how to invest to create regenerative economies within communities that we don't have control over. So, as an example, Brendan Martin and the folks from the working world have been connecting with cooperative loan funds in regions across the U.S. to build a financial cooperative. And the goal of the financial cooperative is to have a fund that is democratically controlled, that makes loans to non-extractive loans to new cooperative businesses or worker buyouts of, maybe traditional businesses in those regional communities, where if there is a return on that investment, it is seen as shared in an equitable way across all constituents. So there's an acknowledgement that the money in doesn't necessarily have privilege or priority over the success of the business itself and the workers and owners of those businesses. And so as an investor, I can look at that and say, this kind of community-based regenerative economic development is exactly what you would want to support through grant making, if you can do it in a way that creates larger pools of capital that are regenerating and that are controlled by the communities and by the constituents of these projects. You get this much broader impact because you're not just like doling out the grant to make the thing work, but of course it's still super dependent on the grant next year. And you as the grant maker still hold all the power and control. You're able to create kind of a flywheel of energy and power and control for the communities, and this like new different vision of how resources are controlled or doled out, so that's the ultimate vision that, that I am most inspired by is, and I'm not saying that we're there yet. We're still kind of growing and figuring out how to help make this happen and how to be a good partner. But the vision of not just the foundations and the people with money holding all the cards and doling them out, but really shifting the power and control, both of capital, but also the commensurate sort of political voice and political power that comes with that into communities so that they can have lasting and systemic change and try to, again, to correct this drastic imbalance that we see. Anytime you see it when you go from, Berkeley to Richmond, or from Palo Alto to East Palo Alto, or, north side of Chicago to the south side of Chicago. It's so visible if you bother to get out there and see, the contrast, or you see it represented also in, the politics of our country right now. There's these huge divides. And I think a good way to heal that is to really get creative about how we're sharing resources and sharing power.
I love that comment. As a few quick side notes, Brendan Martin that Regan mentioned was interviewed on this podcast, I think in November 2017. So for folks who are interested, you can check that out. He talks a lot about the financial cooperative. And our fund, I don't know if you knew this, Regan, our Force for Good fund is probably going to be joining the financial cooperative. So that'd be pretty cool.
That's exciting.
And I think maybe I'm sort of realizing 20 minutes in that I don't know if folks know the mission. Maybe you could tell us the mission statement of the Libra Foundation, or just sort of the sort of general purpose, and maybe a couple examples of investments or grants you've given to kind of give folks a sort of tangible idea of some of the things you're working on.
Great. And don't go look for their website right this minute, because we're about to relaunch a new site. But we will be back up at thelibrafoundation.org if you want to take a closer look. Basically, we were founded 14 years ago under an umbrella of desiring to identify as a human rights organization. We're not so much interested in the traditional concept of human rights work as political prisoners in other countries, but really looking at how the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has codified these basic human liberties and needs that we saw as really essential in terms of access to obviously the political system, but also education, clean environment, right to a full and creative life. And the program areas within that we focused on over the years have included women's health and reproductive rights, environmental justice, and a drug policy and criminal justice reform. And then through our work on the investment side, we've really started to understand how the thread of economic justice and political access it infuses itself across and between those program areas. And there's other projects that we support that don't tidily fit into those program areas. And we're careful to not get too silo-y in how we think about our work. So, we are interested in the ways that immigration justice and drug policy reform connect, or how drug policy and maternity intersect. And so there's a lot of interesting crossovers that we end up supporting and looking at. As far as interesting partnerships, there's so many. We are excited about some new work that we're doing around, I mentioned the economic justice work, so I guess I'll just talk a little bit about Transform Finance. One of our investment advisors is Morgan Simon. She and her partner, Aner Ben-Ami, who have a company called Candide Group, have been advising on our direct investing for the foundation for a couple of years now. And actually, Morgan just wrote a book called Real Impact, The New Economics of Social Change. So if you check that out, what's fun about reading that book for me is that it's definitely her story about her growth and development as an impact investor and advisor. But a lot of the projects that she highlights in the books are projects that the Libra Foundation has also partnered with. So it's a good example of what we aspire to and what we're working on as well. She also co-founded Transform Finance, which is a group that's working with kind of across I like to think of them as like a bridge organization, because what they're doing is they're showing up in spaces where they can talk to investors about best practices in social justice investing, but they're also working really closely with community-based organizations and nonprofits so that folks in communities that we are, ostensibly trying to help also have the tools and language around finance to help them build sustainable and regenerative organizations, whether they're nonprofits or for-profit businesses. And so I think they serve a really important role as a bridge or a liaison between those two communities as we develop and learn what models are going to work for the future.
Yeah, and I just realized we haven't had Morgan on the show. We need to get her on here to talk about her book. So that's a good reminder.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the actual sort of way you think about grant making. Like you said, you used to think, or investments, you used to think it was like checking the boxes, right? Of we'll do the impact now. No more Chevron and big sort of box corporate. But so, there's so much sort of need in the world. It's almost overwhelming. So how do you sort of sift through okay, we're going to focus on this project here, because what's sort of your process, I guess, to identify projects or investments that are worthy? Or is that why you have someone like Morgan Simon to help you sift through everything?
I do. I feel a little guilty because I do feel like we have two of the best people in this field helping us right now. So I definitely cannot overemphasize how dependent I feel like we are on their relationships and networks and analysis. So really that is a huge part of it for the Libra Foundation. But we've also had success working in there's so many different gears that are out there turning, and I'm hoping that they're turning in a direction that's going to move us towards something amazing. But I do think of it as a work in progress, and it's all about sort of relationships and team and connecting. And it's always, I always feel like it's in the state of becoming, but I'll talk a little bit about our, I guess I'm just going to come back to the team question for one more second. So on the investment side, Morgan and Anair have been incredible partners helping us to map out the sort of direct investment side. On the public investing side, we've worked with actually our traditional asset manager. We have a wonderful client relationship manager at ACG, Asset Consulting Group, which is a very what's the right word? Conventional asset manager that manages a lot of pension funds and institutional endowments. But Lori Mills, who's our colleague there, really stepped into action when my mom and I approached her about working to better align our public investments with our mission. And she just jumped in with 2 feet and has been a really great partner and ally. And her being kind of part of the team advocating for better aligned public managers also helped to, for better or for worse, that has helped to justify or elevate the seriousness of those investment decisions to other folks on the team who don't maybe have the mission orientation or the sense of urgency around aligning investments that some of us have around the table. So Lori Mills, Morgan, and Nair, and then for the Libra Foundation itself, we had worked for the first 14 years of our existence. We worked with a wonderful consultant based in Chicago. Her name is Betsy Brill, and she has a company called Strategic Philanthropy. And Strategic Philanthropy was essentially our operating arm of the Libra Foundation for all those years. And in the past year, we've decided, mainly because the board members, which is, again, my family members, have moved out to California. We're all based pretty much in the Bay Area now. And we had been building a family office here that was, again, engaged in these various investment activities. And we decided that it would be really interesting to experiment with having the grant making team and the Libra Foundation based also out of this same office. So what we have now is a new executive director who started in September. Her name is Crystal Haling, and she's bringing a really interesting new energy to the foundation. And one of the things that's exciting is, we've been watching and excited by some of the projects here, especially in the Bay Area, where you have foundations that aren't sort of isolated in a corner, right? That they're kind of contained in different ways within other operations of the family office. So like the Omidyar Network or Emerson Collective. And so we're trying to kind of experiment a little bit with that as well. So our executive director, it manages the Libra Foundation as one of her activities, but she's also employed by the family office and can advise us on political investing or investing beyond just the endowment of the foundation. And so I guess what we're trying to experiment with is really looking at this idea that there's issues out there in the world, and I think the biggest to me are ecological and around sort of racial and social justice. There's issues and then there's solutions, and that grant making is one piece of that. Investing is one piece of that. Political investing is one piece of that. And so you can kind of start to think about, how do you solve problems using all the tools in your toolkit instead of saying like, we're a foundation, we're over in this corner and we just write grants. So I think that's from kind of a big picture, where are we headed level, that's the project that we're most focused on right now. And within that, there's like so many different partner. I mean, essentially, we're still about moving resources. So, all of those things involve moving resources towards groups that are well positioned to, again, be that flywheel for change. So like on the political side, as an example, I was just on a call with two of the Black women organizers who were most very active down in Alabama, canvassing and getting the vote out and mobilizing the Black vote for Doug Jones. And that call was hosted by Movement Voter Project, which is one of our partners, and their basic premise is instead of giving money at the party level or candidate level, how do we get resources to the folks who are in community, where the resources can be committed outside of just an election cycle, right? This is about moving resources for political engagement and political action that builds longer term power and longer term opportunity.
Yeah. I was going to ask you if any of your political investments were like, yeah, we're partnering with Tom Steyer to run a new impeach Trump national campaign.
Everything that guy does is against everything we stand for. So yeah, I am all for transformative political change, but I don't know. I mean, it's such a weird time right now. It's such a weird mix of excitement and also just the constant deluge of challenges. The FCC ruling today is net neutrality is a real blow. But then you have, more and more mainstream folks talking, like including Tom Perez you have like the Democratic Party really starting to acknowledge sort of the new, what Steve Phillips calls the new majority. So I think there's a lot to be hopeful about. I'm kind of a natural optimist, so maybe that's that's just going to be how I survive. But there's a lot to be excited about, but we have to move fast, and we have to definitely get more people thinking about bold and creative and innovative ways to make change. And I think we definitely can push on philanthropy for sure, to be more responsive and to, really think about how to change structures to create more voice and more agency for folks who are the people that are allegedly the ones we're helping. And even as the Libra Foundation, that's something we think about a lot. Like, we're still a pretty traditional structure in the sense that the board is comprised of family members, and we try to partner with groups that are really progressive and cutting edge in terms of how they're doing their work, but we haven't necessarily done the work to change our own structures to reflect those values. And that's that's a little bit of a harder sell sometimes. So I count us within that list of foundations and philanthropy that needs to innovate and make changes. So that's, there's definitely that sense of urgency.
Yeah, it's really interesting around just like a slight sort of dovetail to your comment about politics. Like, I had this conversation with my family at Thanksgiving, like just like the traditional like U.S. like let's go home for Thanksgiving and talk politics. Or I don't know if everyone does that, but at least my family does. And I was, my family's very liberal Democrat supporters, and I was sort of one of the questions I've been holding is like, are Democrats actually liberal enough? Like a lot of my family votes Democrat, but actually would identify more with like Green Party or something. But I feel like everyone's too scared to like vote for a third party. Do you
right.
ever, like, what do you think about that kind of balance?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I actually am, what makes me hopeful, I was thinking about the Alabama election as an example of that. Like Doug Jones was sort of no offense to Doug Jones, I actually don't know that much about him, but I think of him as like, right place, right time, but like I'm not necessarily sure he was the candidate to really actually represent the constituency that elected him, right? I mean, if you look at the numbers, basically Black women elected Doug Jones, and it was a response against the clearly racist Confederate style manner of Roy Moore, more so even maybe than his romantic predilections, such as they may be. But I think I'm hoping that the Democratic Party is really noticing and really seeing, okay, there is this incredible momentum and movement of what really is America now. America is a changing demographic, and I'm just really excited to see more of that happen. Black Lives Matter has launched their electoral justice project. I'm so excited about that. Democracy in Color, which is Steve Phillips' project that's been at work for a while now, but really acknowledging and embracing the people of color in this country and the political voice and the political power that, if you really are a representative democracy, then those are the voices we need to be hearing. And then just don't even get me started on just gender as a locus for change. Because if, and I think people tend to get a little complacent with like, okay, yeah, we do have women in politics, so maybe that's enough. But if you really look at the statistics, we're still such a small percent of elected positions. And I just think, not that all women share one set of values, just in the same way that not all people of color share one set of values. But I just think we have been a white male capitalist system for a long time, and I'm just hoping that we're gearing up for some meaningful change in the next few years, and certainly in the next decade or so.
How do you balance this idea of some foundations? I think most famously maybe Gates Foundations is like, okay, we're gonna sort of like spend all our money within 30 years of Bill Gates or Melinda Gates passing away, and other foundations are more like, well, it's not, maybe more for inheritors. It's not really my money. Like I didn't create it, so I feel like I'm more responsible to stewarding it for the next generation. What are the conversations that you have around that? Is it sort of, or there's like a tug of war between like, hey, we need to deploy this capital now, or no, that's sort of, it's not really our money. How do you balance that?
Well, it's definitely a conversation we have, so I appreciate the question. And it's something I think about a lot personally. I think the traditional debate is that if all the progressive foundations and all the progressive people spend down quickly, then only the conservative people will still have funding to support their pet projects, and that will create this imbalance. And I think that I think people are increasingly starting to agree that that's a limited lens of this story, because what you're really hoping to do is shift resources again to create to move the power and influence to a broader and more democratic allocation. So the hope is that when you give money away, it doesn't just go away, it goes to somebody else. It goes to create a regenerative and productive project where, wherever it lands. And so, I don't feel nervous about spending out or spending down in the big picture. Like, I think that is correct. And it's, I think, something we need to continue to move towards. I feel like for us, and I think maybe this is what slows people down who are not quite ready to go there, is that you just want to experiment. I don't know. It's definitely a tension for me, because I always feel like, what do I know? Like, it's accidental that I ended up in this position in the first place. And so therefore I don't feel, and this kind of to your point of like, well, it wasn't my money in the first place, so how can I be the one to make these big decisions about it? So yeah, I do feel like that slows me down. I guess I would just say on a personal level is this sense of like, do we know yet? Have we learned yet what it is we need to do to actually make that systemic change happen or possible? So that's a bit of a barrier that I deal with, but I'm definitely, from a social justice perspective, I think the accumulation of capital is part of the problem, and that's, it's a problematic thing that we are also dealing with. The other thing I'll just say is that I think there's this difference between kind of writing a check and spending down, and then like creating the structural change that's going to keep that from happening again. So that's, again, an area where I'm just trying to like learn and understand better what's possible, so that you can create the conditions such that pools of capital can start to spend down, and that they won't just be recreated by other people, because that's then you might not achieve the permanent change you're looking for.
Absolutely. Yeah, I would agree. It's a very difficult conundrum. It's like, are the systems ready?
Yeah, but I do think that is one of the barriers that, and again, it's personal for me. It's something I struggle with, because in my mind, I guess the philosophy of like spending down is virtuous to me, and the folks who are doing that, like the Chorus Foundation, Fund for Democratic Communities. I mean, there's some really impressive folks who are modeling out what that looks like, and they're partnering with people like the financial cooperative, where you feel like, okay, there's an endowment model there, sort of, because it's a fund, but it's a living fund. So better to, if there's resources going to be sitting somewhere, let them sit somewhere where there can be regeneration that creates community wealth and well-being. And I think that is sort of the gold standard.
Amen.
Yeah.
So maybe in the last 5-10 minutes here, a few sort of random questions. What is the book you most often give as a gift?
Ooh, that's interesting. It's so funny. A friend of mine offered it on Facebook to identify holiday gifts for anybody. He's like, tell me your person and I'll give you a holiday gift idea. And I was so impressed, because they were really funny, because he like given a random cue, like this guy who likes chemistry and mountain biking, he was able to come up with these great gift suggestions. I'm very responsive. Definitely, okay, Real Impact. I literally have a stack of Morgan Simon's book, Real Impact, by my desk right now. So those are definitely going into the stockings. And then on the fiction side, I'm an elementary school teacher, as I said, so I'm a big fan of anything that's sort of YA and fifth grade literature. So maybe I'll go with The Giver.
Ooh, I like it. Classic.
Yeah.
Another interesting question that one of the guests actually told me I should ask this people. So on a personal or professional level, what is your absolute most favorite thing to do in the world?
Okay, it's Hanukkah season, so I've been frying up a lot of latkes. I'm definitely happy in my kitchen. I like to cook for people and gather people around food. That's a big joy.
Awesome. And what do people never ask you that you wish they did?
That's a tricky one. I wish people would ask me about, I don't know that I think like that. I don't know. My kids. I love talking about my kids. Sometimes that's the most annoying thing, to go on and on about your kids, but I'm never tired of that conversation.
I love kids too. How old are your kids?
They are 13, 16, and 18.
Wow.
Yeah, so not really kids. One's an adult.
Fully teenagers. Or I guess, one's an adult too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a 6-month-old and a 3-year-old.
Oh my gosh, yes, you're on the other side of that whole
Yeah.
journey. It's awesome.
Yes.
It's the best roller coaster ride I've ever been on.
It's funny. I actually asked Liesel Pritzker what her favorite kids book is, and she gave me this. It's called Dragons Love Tacos, and it's really it's more of a recent book, last like 5 years, but I gave it to my daughter, and she was obsessed for like a year. So I have to tell Liesel that it was a good recommendation.
That's funny. That reminds me of there was a series when my kids were little called about rhinos who skate was the first one. Rhinos who surf. They're like really cool rhinos.
That's awesome.
That series is pretty awesome too.
Last 2 questions here. Who else, like, who do you look to for inspiration? Who are you inspired by, maybe in the sort of either impact investing side or the sort of like, I guess the investee or like project side?
Yeah, I'm surprised I made it through a whole hour without talking about Movement Generation. That's a group based in Oakland. That's a collective working on kind of the connection between social justice and ecology. And what I appreciate about them is that they, similar to Transform Finance, they are really willing to work across the ecosystem and, talk to funders and donors, work with movement and community-based groups. And they're very good at describing what we need to do to build the world that we want for the future. I think we spend a lot of time in resist mode these days, and they are about kind of productive work towards a positive future. And it involves building kind of healthy and connected and environmentally oriented movements of folks. And they've been really important in outlining the tenets of what I think is gaining in popularity, and kind of people are coming to understand more of this concept of a just transition. And I mean, it's not new to probably many of your listeners, but they are the ones who kind of best explained it to me as I was learning about it, and really understanding the issue that we have an ecological crisis, but we also have a human rights and a social crisis. And if you just solve one without confronting the other, we're still sunk. So, looking at the renewable energy is great as an investor or whatever, but if your renewable energy project is at the expense of the community where it's located, or at the expense of, appropriate sharing of ownership and capital, then we're still in a lot of trouble. So I really appreciate the team at Movement Generation for being leaders on that.
And you just reminded me of the second person I need to interview is Gopal from Movement Generation.
Oh, so Gopal and I went to graduate school together.
Oh, wow.
So he's a teacher too.
I didn't know that. Yeah, I'll write him an email and say, just like Regan. Okay.
Yeah, Gopal and Michelle and Quentin. I mean, they are very much the other thing I just want to appreciate about them, and they don't call themselves out because they always work in partnership and in solidarity with a lot of other groups, and they're part of the Climate Justice Alliance, and they're part of the Financial Cooperative as well. And they really walk the walk in terms of how they are structured as a collective and how they work together. And I really admire them for building an organization that is designed and structured to represent those values of equality and equity and mutualism that they espouse. So it's really inspiring.
So it sounds like the LibraFoundation.org may be up soon. Do you know if folks can find out about it?
Yeah, so there's a lot of excitement about our evolving our evolving work and this new chapter we find ourselves in as we're trying to just think more broadly about what it is we're designed to accomplish. And the version of our website that's going to be coming out in a week or so isn't a huge departure from what was there before, but and we'll give people a chance to see some examples of our grantees and our investees. But we're going to be working on doing a little bit of a better job of talking about our work. I think That hasn't been a big focus for us in the past. Again, for the reasons I mentioned at the beginning of the interview, we really don't think the Libra Foundation in and of itself is a thing that needs to be celebrated. It's kind of, what are we able to accomplish, and who are we partnering with? And we would like to raise up those voices. So we'll be doing more, hopefully doing a better job of creating a platform for our grantees and for this conversation about changing philanthropy and shifting structures to be more responsive and more accountable.
Well, thank you so much, Regan. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I must say I'm amazed, very humble and very very committed to social and environmental justice. So it's just been amazing speaking with you. I wanted to thank you. Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.